Good evening. I am here with a true short story for you. This one is called Then Came the Flood. It is by Carol Green. Let me begin. We sat in the dark in my sister's living room, the six of us, and listened to the telltale cracks of trees splitting and constant lashing of rain against the windows, the house groaning as water and mud rose to the sills outside. No one said a word. We had vowed to stay together through the night. My husband Nate and me, my sister Bonnie and her husband, my mother and my father, plus our two dash hounds, Freddie and Minnie. All of us waiting for our lives to be washed away with the house and the ranch. After all, if we lost the ranch, what good were our lives? Establishing the ranch had been everything for our family. My mother and father had spent more than 50 back-breaking years carving the place out of a dry and desolate corner of the northeastern California. They built the ranch house a quarter mile from the hillside, not far from a stream we used for irrigation. In the corral below, we'd raised a dairy barn, a separator house where we separated cream from milk, a hay barn, the tack shed, and the oil shed. As kids, we grew up on that land, married, and set up households of our own. I settled nearby with my husband and continued to work the ranch. We mended fences, drove cattle to the summer ranches, brought them home in the fall. We were never far from the smell of horses, dampened leather, dust, sage, and juniper. It was hard, honest work, cowboy work, I guess, but I wouldn't have traded it for the highest paying city job. This was God's country, and we lived close to it and close to Him. Then came the flood. On New Year's Day, 1997, Nate and I went with my father to help feed the cattle. It had rained almost every day for 2 weeks straight. Sometimes a mist, sometimes a heavy rain falling onto snow-pack in the mountains. The field was a muddy mess, and the stream behind my parents' house was running high and fast, transformed from a gentle brook to a raging river. We spent a long hour trying to channel the flow away from the house, but couldn't do it. We called a neighbor who brought his backhoe. The water kept coming. Other neighbors helped, but early afternoon their ranches were flooded too. We fixed our neighbors' dinner before they rushed home. Afterward, I was at the back porch washing up when I saw a dark avalanche of mud and debris rushing toward the house. "Grab the dogs and go out the front," I hollered. Dad pulled the back door shut, and each of us drove in the car, truck, or tractor to Bonnie's house, a quarter mile away. There we settled down to rest, but nothing could induce me to sleep. Like a caged cat, I paced. Finally, I lay down, but then a horrid, stomach-churning boom rattled the house from top to bottom. All the lights went out. I got up and put on my clothes. "It was just the rain and wind," Nate said. "Ain't no wind sound like that," my mother declared. Bonnie lit an old coal oil lantern, and we phoned 911 to tell them where we were. They couldn't send anyone to get us in the dark, so my husband assured them we'd be fine riding out the storm together. Dad was silent, his jaw set. I think he knew before the rest of us how little hope was left. With the coal oil lamp, Bonnie and I went out to the back porch to see what had hit us. All at once, another slip of mud and debris came roaring down the hill like a runaway train. An uprooted tree hurled toward us. "Carol, shut the door!" my sister screamed. I slammed the kitchen door just as a 30-foot-long tree trunk smashed it hard. Bonnie went around to the front. "I smell gas," she cried. Sure enough, the line was broken. I blew out the coal oil lamp. Now there was no heat, no light. We had one flashlight with weak batteries, but we decided to save it for when we really needed it. There in the pitch dark of the living room, we waited, nobody saying a word. We paced the room and listened to the rain and wind groaning outside the house, just waiting. So is this what it comes to, I wondered? Was this what it came from, living too close to God's earth and making a life for ourselves? All the years of toil and sweat wiped out in a matter of minutes? Lord, keep us safe. In my anguish, I could barely pray, but I forced myself. I could not allow my despair to separate me from the only resource we had left. There was my father, my mother, my sister, brother-in-law, and husband. What would we have left without the ranch? A little past midnight, a log broke through a window. My sister kept a sheet of plywood under her bed for her back, so we put that over the window. We have to look for higher ground, I shouted. My father shook his head. He wasn't going anywhere. He would rather die than leave the ranch. No, we implored him. Come with us. Finally, we coaxed him to the bedroom where we helped one another through the window. It was dark. The rain poured down like I couldn't believe. We slodged across the yard to the old wash shed behind the house, stopping to take in the scene. A huge log wedged precariously between the shed and the house was the only thing that had kept us from washing away in the path of the slips. The woodshed had been tipped over and all the buildings below it were gone. My father's car had been smashed into a jumbled mass with the old pickup, and the whole of our land as far as we could see had turned into mud and water. My father looked at my husband. You think there's any way you can get out? Nate shook the rain from his hat. I'd be a fool to even try. When we saw how the log had blocked the water and saw the water and debris behind it, when we felt the wind and rain, we reasoned we would be better off back in the house. If that log gives, I said, we'll be gone too. One by one, we climbed back into the house. The phone was still working, so I called a neighbor to say where we were and how many of us were there. If rescuers ever came, I wanted them to know. My brother-in-law kept getting up from the couch to fix himself soda water because he had an upset stomach. My father, breathing heavily, rested in the rocker by the front door. My sister and I paced the floor. My father thought he heard engines rumbling. Here they come for us, he called out. Here they are. Our hearts raced with hope. Nate climbed out the bedroom window, but could see nothing. He worked his way to the tractor and took it down to the field, but he couldn't reach the road. When he came back, he told us, I'm only going to say this once because I can't believe it myself. There's nothing left. The ranch is gone. At first light, Nate and my brother-in-law went out, and that time they got the tractor in the highway where they met our rescuers. EMTs and firemen had hit mud in the road about a quarter mile away, stopped their vehicles and came across on foot through the mud, 15 feet deep in places. I took a few things and stuffed them in a pillowcase. With the pillowcase slung over my back and one of the dash hounds under my arm, I started to the road, a quarter mile through heavy mud, one step at a time. I sank until something stopped me. Sometimes I sank 5 inches and kept walking. Other times I sank to my hip and had to set the dog down and pull myself out before I could get moving again. Don't bring anyone this way, I told the EMTs, because they won't make it. I went south and the others were hauled out in a tractor and a wagon. Tired, covered in mud, cold to the bone, we finally met up at the firehouse and slept overnight at a motel. The flood had raged, but the sun was shining brightly on the snowy peaks the next day as we rode back to the ranch. The air smelled damp and rich, and we were still together, the 6 of us together and alive. But the ranch house was gone, clean washed away. Nate's and my home was gone. The huge barn filled with hay gone. Our milk house was gone. The gas tanks were gone. the saddle shed with all of our riding tack, my brand new saddle, my husband's 6-month-old custom-made saddle, gone. Everything, gone. My father's 16-foot horse trailer and another pickup were washed onto our stock truck. There was no chicken house, no fences, no dry range land. We found some calves dead in the breeze, but most of the cows had found safe ground, thank God. I had driven the saddle horses out of the corral earlier and shut the gate, so they were safe. We rescued my father's stock dog, who was buried up to her neck and barking for her life. Just 2 days earlier, I had told myself there would be no life, nothing without the ranch. As we stood together surveying the devastation, I felt almost elated. There was one thing left standing. Our family, the 6 of us. My mother must have felt the same way. People say they don't know what God looks like, she said to me, tears running down her face. But I know. He has 6 hands. 2 nights ago, he must have had a hand on each of our heads. And he kept all 6 of us safe. With his hand on your head, you're going to be okay, aren't you? Yes, I answered. No matter what happens, you're going to be okay, right? Yes, Mother. We are going to be okay. And that was the story of Then Came the Flood by Carol Green.